Speaking of the USO, if you recall, in April of last year, you can hear me anyway, come on. April of last year, Helen Denton was here and we talked about a book, and in November we had this book last year, and since then Helen has donated $3,000 to the USO from sales of this book. So that's good enough. And the reason I'm up here is the middle of September of this year, I get a call from Pat Gartland. He said, Babcock, I've got a guy coming in to speak to us in November that you need to talk to. I said, what? He said, he's got a book. I said, good, I always like to talk to authors. And I called Jim Lawrence and I said, tell me about it. And he told me about being with the 7th Cavalry, part of the 1st Cavalry Division at LZ Albany in November of 1965. That struck me real close because it was in August of 1965 that I pulled into Fort Benning as a young second lieutenant when the 1st Cav was shipping out. And then as I was driving from airborne school to Fort Lewis, every half hour on the radio I heard reports about the 1st Cav in a big fight in Vietnam. And if y'all remember back there like I do, Vietnam was a far away place. I was going up to guard the Great Northwest at Fort Lewis. I knew on that ride across that Vietnam was going to be in my future. And then to bring it even closer, 1 year after the fight in the Ad Rang Valley, I was down there at Play Me Special Forces Camp after riding all night on Halloween they were supposed to get hit again. Thank God they didn't. So this thing got close to me. So I said, Jim, we're going to make this happen. He's speaking today, and this was like 16th of September. I got into this book, and let me tell you, as a Vietnam vet, I have read lots of these books, lots of Vietnam books. This one got me good, bad, better than about anyone I have read. If you are a ground combat infantryman or cavalryman, Jim, for crying out loud. Jeez. But this, you're going to cry reading this book. But this is one you can give to your family and let them hear things that you can't tell them. In fact, I was driving to Athens last Friday, and Jan said, how do I describe this book? And I started crying telling her, this is a great book. I encourage you to get it and pass it around to your family members. We're selling it back there at the back. Jim, come on up. Brett, put that hat on, man. Put that hat on. Let me see what a cavalryman looks like. Jerry Owen.
Thank you, Bob. This is normally a 1-hour talk that I will do in 30 minutes, so you better listen fast. And typically, when I make this talk, we all have ghosts, don't we, guys? The way I handle my ghost is to talk about it. I have talked to many groups of people. I've talked to ladies' clubs. I've talked to college groups. I've talked to elementary Christian school groups. I've never, ever talked to a room full of Vietnam veterans.
Jim, I'll put the speaker.
So that means that I can't tell any lies, can I? Because you know, if you go to reunions, war stories are like fish stories. They get bigger and bigger and bigger every time you meet. So let me take you back. You see standing before you a 72-year-old man, but I want to take you back to 1965. Take you back to when I was a 24-year-old first lieutenant. I was the executive officer of Delta Company, 2nd Battalion, 7th Cavalry, 1st Cavalry Division, Air Mobile. Very quickly, some background. We in An, our base camp in the Central Highlands, had got military intelligence that the North Vietnamese, People's Army of Vietnam, the PAVN, were going to cut the country in half. They were going to drive in from Cambodia, go right down the highway and split the country in half. So Army intelligence sent the 3rd Brigade of the 1st Cavalry Division Air Mobile over to Pleiku in the Central Highlands. 2 units I want to talk about. First unit I'll just touch on because you already are familiar with them and their story. On Sunday, November the 14th, 1965, 1st Battalion, 7th Cavalry air assaulted into a clearing called Landing Zone X-Ray at the foot of Chupong Mountain under the command of Colonel Hal Moore. For 2.5 days, 1st of the 7th fought the North Vietnamese that were pouring off the mountain. How many of y'all have seen the movie We Were Soldiers, the Mel Gibson movie? I figured all of you have. Good movie. Randall Wallace did us right. The conclusion of the movie is not accurate, and I'll explain that if I have time later. We do some questions and answers. But Randall Wallace did a good job. But if you remember the movie, the landing zone was rocky. The actual landing zone X-ray was as flat as your table. And Chupong Mountain went straight up, almost at a 90-degree angle. The North Vietnamese were on the mountain. We landed right at their base camp, and they came pouring off the mountain for 2.5 days. I won't describe that battle for you because you are familiar with it, and I don't have time to go into it. 2nd Battalion, 7th Cavalry were in supporting locations on other landing zones around X-Ray. I was over on landing zone Columbus with the artillery, and we were monitoring the battle by listening on the radio, and we could hear the gunfire just far enough away. We're just a couple of miles away, and we knew that all hell was breaking loose over there. On Tuesday, November the 16th, and this is one of the inaccuracies in the movie, 1st of the 7th was going to be pulled out by the 229 Helicopter Assault Battalion, and we went in to replace them. So 2nd of the 7th goes in on X-ray as the 1st of the 7th comes out. So I'm on the ground the night, Tuesday, November the 16th, and we can look at the mountain and we can see fires up there. We knew the bad guys were still in the area, but 1st of the 7th had kicked butt for 2.5 days. 1st of the 7th in 2.5 days had 79 Americans killed and 120 wounded out of the battalion. On Wednesday morning, November the 17th, 1965, we were given orders to move overland to other clearings. One group went straight to Columbus, the landing zone I came off of, but 2nd Battalion, 7th Cavalry, with another company attached, were moving to another clearing called Landing Zone Albany. Landing Zone Albany is a battle that nobody wants to talk about. You'll see why in just a second. Landing Zone X-Ray gets all the notoriety for a lot of reasons. Number one is the great book, We Were Soldiers Once and Young, Hal Moore and Joe Galloway. They wrote this book and they did a great job. Albany's in here, but General Moore, then Colonel Moore, and Joe Galloway were never on Albany, except when they went back to research and write the book. We got the word to move overland to this clearing, Albany, about 3.5 clicks away. And we were told, now keep in mind, I'm a 1st lieutenant. I'm the executive officer of Delta Company, of the Armed Support Company. We were told that we were going to this clearing to be picked up by helicopter because the B-52s from Guam were going to come over and bomb the mountain, Chupong Mountain. Chupong Mountain was a big, massive complex. It went way over into the Cambodian border. A big mountain range. So we're moving overland, and we're moving towards this clearing, and we made our first mistake right there. I thought, now keep in mind, this is a lieutenant's perspective, not a major, not a colonel, not even a captain. It was an administrative move. Now, my old recon platoon, I was the first recon platoon leader of 2nd Battalion, 7th Cav in Vietnam, but I'd just been promoted. I'd just been promoted just a couple of weeks from 2nd lieutenant to 1st lieutenant, just a couple of weeks before the Adrang Valley. And a whole bunch of new officers had just come in before this battle. The battalion commander, a couple of company commanders. So we had just gone through a changeover at the officer level. So we're moving overland, and we were making an administrative move, except for my old recon platoon and A company, who were point. The rest of us were clanging and banging and cussing and tired and hungry and ready to get the hell out of there. We'd seen all the bodies over on X-ray, and we knew what the 1st of the 7th had gone through, and we just really wanted to get out of there. And we thought we were moving towards that landing zone to be picked up and taken out. So here we go. It was hot. We were in the jungles, in the highland jungles. It was hot. We were miserable. We were tired. As I said, we just wanted out. So we were going through some really heavy growth, and then sometimes it would clear up, and then heavy growth. And so finally, let me speed forward because of time. Finally, the point, somebody in A Company, maybe my old recon platoon, somebody up there passed a grass and wooden hut that had some storage, had some rice in there, some other things, and obviously we assumed that belonged to the bad guys. So somebody in there, brilliant, thought, put a Zippo lighter to it and torched it. Now, if you light up a big old straw hut with supplies in it in the middle of the jungle, what happens? Big old plume of smoke goes up and basically says, here's where we are. That was one of our mistakes. Second mistake, except for A Company and recon platoon at the point, Delta Company, Charlie Company behind me, headquarters group behind them, were moving administratively, not tactically. We were moving in a column formation, one company behind the other. Some of us did not have any flank security, and that was a mistake. As we left the last part of the jungle area, we got into a flat area with elephant grass about 2 to 3 feet high, and you know how tough elephant grass is if you've ever been in the highlands there. And it was broken up by very tall trees that were bare way up to 20 or 30 feet, and then they canopied and grew together and formed a dark area. And then we had, some people call them termite mounds, we call them anthills. If you've never seen them, they were about 6 feet tall, they're hard as this. They look like a little bitty volcano, they're shaped like this, they're about 6 feet at the bottom, and you can stand on them, hide behind them, lean up against them. This area approaching the landing zone was punctuated by those anthills, those termite mounds. We're moving along, and my old recon platoon captured 2 North Vietnamese. Now keep in mind, I'm saying North Vietnamese, I'm not saying Viet Cong. These were not South Vietnamese in black pajamas. These were uniformed North Vietnamese soldiers. They wore khaki uniforms, had a big silver belt buckle with a red star on it, had pith helmets, armed with AK-47s. These guys were good. They'd come down the Ho Chi Minh Trail from the northern country. We captured 2. When they were captured, the colonel, headquarters group was behind me. I was, again, in Delta Company, in column. Colonel and the command group moves forward to interrogate the prisoners. The column stops. The column stops in bad guy territory. We started taking an administrative break. Men dropped their packs, dropped their weapons, took off the steel pots, opened cans of rations, lit cigarettes, went down on the ground and took a nap. Now, about that time, the call comes back from the command group that's now forward, and we're stopped now, and I can see off to my left, I can see a clearing. I assume was landing zone Albany. The column stops, and the battalion commander, who's now forward near the clearing with the 2 prisoners and the interrogator, the interpreter, calls all the company commanders and their RTOs forward to decide how they wanted to occupy the landing zone. So what you've got now is a column of tired, cussing, worn-out Americans stopped in the jungle. Now, jungle's kind of misleading. It's somewhat open. With the company commanders forward, the companies therefore are beheaded. Now, you know, if the company commanders are forward, who's in charge of the companies? The executive officers. I was the executive officer of Delta Company. He didn't even tell me. Captain Thorpe didn't even say you're in charge. He said, we've been called forward. And they took off. Now, I'm standing there and I'm looking around and I'm somewhat uncomfortable. We don't know exactly what's going on. We know prisoners have been captured. Now, folks, if there are 2 of them out there might be more. And on my right flank, and we've been paralleling this now for a couple of 100 yards, was a green wall. Now, when I say wall, I don't mean man-made wall. I mean a green wall of underbrush, growth, trees, bushes, thorns, and we'd been walking parallel to this thing, and it was no more than, say, from me to that hedge right over there. It was no further away than that. I assumed, and that was a mistake, that we had somebody else on the other side of that green wall. We did not. What was going on about noon when we stopped on the 17th of November, we had stumbled onto 3 regiments of North Vietnamese who were camped on the Drang River about another couple of 100 yards past the landing zone. They heard us, they saw the smoke, and they formed a horseshoe or an L-shaped ambush in front of us on the other side of the clearing and down behind that green wall. It's about 1:15 in the afternoon on Wednesday, November the 17th. I'm standing there, men are taking breaks, some of them are already asleep, they're smoking, they're eating. Way forward, across the landing zone, I hear a quick report from an automatic weapon. And then another. And I thought, what in the hell? Don't they understand? They don't need to be firing weapons out in the middle of the jungle. We don't know who's out there. And then just another second or 2, that green wall all the way down the right flank of A Company, my company, Delta Company, Charlie Company, Headquarters Company, absolutely erupted. Machine gun fire, automatic weapons fire, small arms fire. It just exploded. And it was like someone took a giant scythe and just went shoosh across the whole column of Americans. We were down and we were hurting in a matter of minutes. In a matter of minutes. And the other thing, the North Vietnamese understood that because we had air superiority and we had artillery, they understood close with the Americans as quickly as you can, because they will not call air power and artillery in on their own position. So the minute they started the ambush, they came pouring out of that green hedge, that green wall. They also had put men in trees, in the canopy trees, tied in position up there with machine guns. We didn't know they were up there. And they put it to us. I would say in the first 30 to 45 minutes of the battle is when most of the damage was done. I went down in the prone position. I became a rifleman like everybody else. And when you go down in elephant grass about 3 feet tall, you can't see any further than here in that second table right there. And I'm going to be honest with you guys, and I hope you don't respect me less for telling you this. But the first thought I had when I went down on the ground and realized that I had a company in an ambush, and what do they teach us at Fort Benning? If you have a company in ambush, what is your job? Get them out of the kill zone as quickly as you can. And I remember having this thought: I don't want this job. I would like for someone to step forward and take over the executive officer position of Delta Company, 2nd Battalion, 7th Cavalry. Because I knew that this was mine, this was my show, this was my baby. And that thought only lasted a moment or two. By this time, the North Vietnamese are there. I remember there was an anthill about 10 feet to my right, and the North Vietnamese ran up behind it, and Sergeant Baker, one of my platoon sergeants, was right here, said, "Sergeant Baker, right there." Now, you understand, if you've been in combat, there's this tremendous amount of noise. You can't hear anything much. And I was yelling to a man right here saying, "He's right there." And Sergeant Baker jumped up, ran around the anthill, and took him out with an M16. They're coming right at us. And about that time, to show you how confusing this was, I get a call on the radio from the battalion commander saying, ceasefire, ceasefire, we're shooting each other. I'm looking at North Vietnamese running at me. I will confess now, as a first lieutenant, I disobeyed a colonel's orders on a battlefield. I did not order a ceasefire because they were shooting at us and we were shooting at them. Now, to hurry up because I've only got about 10 minutes left. I realized, again, that I was in charge of the company and the company was in an ambush. And I realized I had to do what I had to do, what we were trying to do, and that's get them out. So I realized I would have to stand up to make the move, to make the command, to give the command to move. I started up. I put the butt of my M16 on the ground. I started up. There was a machine gunner tied in a tree to my left front. He saw me. I had on a steel pot, and you know, the steel pot, helmet liner, the webbing, because I was a paratrooper, had the little flat sponge donut inside the steel pot. Had it strapped on. I started up. He sees me. He fixes, he fires. He puts 2 rounds in the helmet right there, 2 small holes, 2 jagged rounds right here. The 2 rounds were so close that it clipped the webbing that was resting on the sponge donut. So we're talking about that far from the top of my head. I did not bleed 1 drop of blood. Those 2 rounds never touched skin. But the impact was like someone hitting me in the head with a sledgehammer. It knocked me backwards. I knew I'd been shot in the head. I felt nothing. I felt nothing here. I felt nothing here. I remember Sergeant Bowen, who was our first sergeant, and I don't know how you knew this, but back in base camp weeks before, saying, the wound that kills you, you don't feel, you just die. So I lay down to die. I knew the top of my head had been shot off. I was not going to reach up there and feel brain. So I simply laid down to die. And I'll tell you the thought I had. I've got a little sister, my mom and dad from Troy, Alabama. And I remember having this thought, Mama, I'm sorry. Mama, I'm so sorry. But your only son's been killed in Vietnam. I'm so sorry. And I had that thought over and over again. Sergeant Baker comes up and he shakes me and says, Lieutenant, we got to do something. We got to get out of here. And I remember being offended by that. I said, don't you see I've been shot and I'm dying? Would you leave me alone? He rolled me over on my back. I realized he was correct. My head was against the base of a tree. The tree was getting hit on 3 different sides. The only order I gave was at that moment in time, I said, Sergeant, move them that way. The only side of the tree that wasn't receiving fire. And I pointed towards the copse of trees that was in between the 2 clearings that made up Landing Zone Albany. He said, then we're gone. I said, I understand. He said, we'll try to carry you. And I said, if you can. Somebody grabbed me, started dragging me, and that person, I don't know to this day who that was shot. But what they had done, they had dragged me towards the clearing, heading in the direction I had told them to go. Now the reason that's significant, by this time, Major Frank Henry, who was the battalion executive officer who saved our Fanny, he's buried in Arlington. I visit his grave every year when we have reunions in Washington. Major Frank Henry had gotten on the radio with 2 A1E Sky Raiders. Now that is a great airplane. The Phantoms would have been too fast. Air Force, 2 A1Es up there. I think they're Air Force. They might have been Navy. No, we got some Navy guys here. Were orbiting the landing zone. These 2 A1Es were loaded with napalm, bombs, rockets. The North Vietnamese were now charging on line, groups of 20 or 30 across the clearing, attacking the 55 or so healthy Americans in that copse of trees. And every single time they would come out of the wood line, the A1Es were like crop dusters. They would come and sit down and just cook them. The North Vietnamese would send another group. Here come the other A1E, cook them. By this time, Major Henry had already got artillery in there. Now, we were bringing it in on ourselves because we were all intermingled. I'm on the ground. I've been dropped out there near the landing zone. I'm so close to the napalm that the grass around me is curling when the A1E unloads. And then I had this thought, this is not good. They didn't kill me. My own Air Force is going to cook me. And I started crawling. I was on my face. I was grabbing. I could move my arms and nothing else. I couldn't move anything from the waist down. I'm grabbing grass and I'm pulling. I'm using the front of my helmet like a sled. I'm grabbing grass and pulling and grabbing grass and pulling. And about that time, somebody grabbed me under both armpits. And the North Vietnamese were running past us now. And you could hear that staccato, that high-pitched staccato language of theirs. And then you'd hear an American go, no, no, no. They were executing the wounded. They had no capacity to take prisoners. They didn't execute me. I don't know why. They were there. I was there. When that person grabbed me under both armpits, I had another heart attack. It was a medic who dragged me into that copse of trees. The rest of the afternoon, we defended that copse of trees, or they did. I was paralyzed. I couldn't move. But I was conscious most of the time. I heard Major Henry one time tell the A1E, he said, we need for you to, told the artillery, said, we need for your spotter to bring in some rounds. And Major Henry said, I'm going to throw smoke. Smoke is orange. I'm going to throw smoke. And obviously the person on the radio says, where from the smoke do you want the artillery? And he said, on the smoke. So it was no further than he could throw the smoke. It was that close. Battle lasted the rest of the afternoon. It began to tail off that evening. B Company came in support. Our B Company had been with 1st of the 7th on X-ray. The reason that's significant, you maybe heard the name Lt.Ret Rescorla. He was the platoon leader in B Company, the hero of 9/11. If we have a chance, we'll talk about him later. I'll stay around for questions. They came in. The battle pretty much stopped around sunset, even though there was some firing. There were groups of Americans all out in the column that were defending themselves. We spent the night on the ground. It was still too hot for any medevacs to come in. I spent the night on the ground, and I remember being fascinated by watching. There was a Smokey the Bear upstairs, orbiting, dropping flares. And all night I was fast. It never got dark that night because the flare would drop. You'd hear it pop way up high. And then you watch it dance. And the trees would dance because the flare was moving under the little parachute. And about the time the flare would start hissing, it was close enough, it would burn out. Then way up high, pop, here comes another flare. I spent the whole night watching the trees dance. Fascinating, just fascinating. I've got that picture right now. Next morning, battle was over. Medevacs come in, take out the wounded. Chinooks come in, take out the dead. They policed the battlefield. I was taken out early that morning. I was taken to a tent hospital in Pleiku. They knew I had a neck problem. They sent me to Quin Yon Hospital there. It was just like MASH, just like you see on television. The doctor there said, your spine might have been severed. We're sending you to Clark Air Force Base Hospital in the Philippines. If my spine had been severed, you know what that meant. I got to Clark Air Force Base, sophisticated hospital. In fact, spine had not been severed but bruised because of the impact. After 2 months of rehabilitation and Christmas and Thanksgiving and New Year's and the Bob Hope Show, I recovered. I went back in the country on January the 18th of 1966 to finish my tour and end my 2 years of military commitment, and I went back to South Alabama. To put the two battles in perspective, in 2.5 days on landing zone X-ray, 1st of the 7th had 79 Americans killed, 120 wounded. In 6 hours on landing zone Albany, 155 Americans killed, 124 wounded. The United States Army didn't want to talk about Albany. When I got back from the hospital, because I was an English major at the Citadel, the new colonel asked me to write a history of the 2nd of the 7th in 1965, which I did. I tried to deal with it very honestly. I turned it in. It's still in military records today, but what you will read ain't mine. My name's on it, but it got edited. That battle was turned into a, quote, great American victory. Now, we killed more of the bad guys than they did of us. There are reasons for that. They thought they had us. Everything from cooks to colonels came in for the kill. We killed more senior officers on Albany in half a day than died on X-ray in 2.5 days. But trust me, it was not a great American victory. I was there. It didn't feel that way. Now we'll conclude with this. The tragedy of any battle, the ones you were in, the one I was in, whether it's Vietnam, World War II, Afghanistan, Iraq, it doesn't matter. The tragedy of any battle is the loss of American lives. Doesn't matter what the cause is. Cause may be good, cause may not be so good. But the tragedy is the loss of American lives. I want to tell you very briefly about a lieutenant who was right behind me when I was wounded. His name is Don Cornett. He was the best friend I had in the Army. He's one of the best friends I've ever had in my life. We were roommates in infantry officer basic school together. We were roommates in jump school together at Lawson Field at Fort Benning. We were roommates on the USNS Maurice Rose together going over to the battle. We were both promoted the same night out in the field in Vietnam to first lieutenants. I was executive officer of Delta Company. He was executive officer of Charlie Company. The two companies that were overrun were Delta and Charlie. He was a much braver man than I. He gave the command. And he did the infantry, follow me. And started leading Charlie Company out of the ambush. And he was shot and killed. So when I make speeches to non-veteran groups, I say this. I say, when you go to the wall, you see 58,000 plus names. When I go to the wall, I see Don Cornett's name 58,000 times. Because he had a wife named Sylvia, a beautiful 18-month-old son named Kevin, a mother and a father, and 2 sisters. So every name on that wall, you multiply by 9 or 10, because that's how many people who were affected by that. So let me just close with a couple of observations. First, wars are fought by young people, not old people. Wars are fought by young people. That in itself is a tragedy. They had lives to live. Don Cornett would have been, there's no telling what he would have accomplished had he lived past November the 17th, 1965. He was one of the sharpest men I've ever known. Second point, dying men call for their mothers, because I heard it all night long on that day. Third point, anyone who glorifies war has never been in one. There are no John Waynes on the battlefield. If they are, they've got a Medal of Honor hanging around their neck. They may be still alive. More chances than not, they're not. Fourth point, images and memories of war never leave a soldier's mind. Do they, guys? Fifth point, every battle survivor suffers from survivor's guilt. Every one of us wonder why we were allowed to live when people like Don Cornett did not. I question that every day. And here's how I answered. I was allowed to live so I could come here and talk to you today. Amen. And for tomorrow and the day after, whatever that brings. Sixth point, Americans have something special in them that is exhibited on the battlefield. I am proud to be an American. We get in a lot of wars for wrong reasons, because too many decisions are made by politicians. But I've seen it with my own eyes. I know what Americans are made of, and I know we've got something inside of us that makes us special, and I'm very proud of that. Seventh point, strategies and tactics in recent wars from Vietnam forward have been created and implemented by those who do not understand combat.
You tell it. You're right.
Read a book, a new book called The Outpost. If you hadn't read that book, you need to read it. I've got a copy right here. I don't, what's the author's name, Pat?
Jake Tapper.
Jake Tapper. Jake Tapper. It's about Afghanistan, and the same decisions being made that you'll read about in that book were decisions that we had to live with in Vietnam, and that book will make you angry. Then the last thing I want to say is the way Hal Moore closed every single talk he's ever given. Listen carefully. Hate war, but love the American warrior. Amen. Thank you for your time.
Jim, thank you so much for being with us. We'd like to present to you one of our AVVBA ties that has the Vietnam
Love it.
Colors in it and a Vietnam Challenge Corps.
Thank you, Tom. I appreciate that.
Do we have, you have time for a couple questions?
Yeah, absolutely.
Anyone have any questions about that?
Questions?
I'll be glad to answer questions.
Sit down.
If you'll have a seat, those of you who can, I'll be glad to answer any questions.
At ease. At ease. At ease, gentlemen.
Yes, sir.
There's been much said about the personnel system for officers in Vietnam, where we had 6 months in command and then rotated the officer to a staff job, and ticket punching by taking officers who were notoriously not qualified or fit for command. In the accounts that I've read of your battle at LZ Albany and 2nd of the 7th Cav, there was great criticism of your battalion commander due to the fact he had not served in line combat before and had what I think come from being the personnel officer at division headquarters. I'd like to ask you to comment on that.
I will. That's partially accurate in the sense that he had been promoted from a desk job in Saigon. His name is Colonel Robert McDade. McDade is his name. He's recently passed away. Reason I said that's partially correct, he had not been in command in Vietnam, but he has a Silver Star from Korea. So he'd been in combat, but Korea was a different kind of war than what we were fighting. And he's been criticized for that historically in military writings. There were mistakes made. It would not be fair to hang all of that on him. I made a mistake. I'm standing there with a company in an administrative break. We've got this green wall over there, and I'll have to be honest with you. The thought I had was, well, I'm concerned about that, but I'm just a lieutenant. We got captains and majors and colonels who ought to be telling us what to do. But I had sergeants and privates who were depending on me because I was in charge of a company, although I'd never been officially put in charge. Company commander simply went forward with his RTO. So I think it'd be a mistake to hang it all on Colonel McDade. He was at fault. Frank Henry, the exec XO, he saved us. He took the bull by the horns when things had to happen. But there were captains and lieutenants and others who made mistakes. Yes, good question though. I saw a hand back here. Yes, sir.
I was just going to echo his comments. I just finished Larry Gwynn's book, who was the XO of Alpha Company, as I recall. And he said, basically, it's almost mirror what you said, so it's unbelievable the two are together. And I never have understood from day one, when I knew about McDade, how in the world he kept his job. And apparently the whole thing was covered up in the first cast. And Westmoreland didn't have a damn clue that any of this had really happened.
Yeah,
so to me, it was a command decision to shut the hell up about everything.
Well, you know, I was being critical. I was being critical of the politicians, but I thought about this. In fact, I thought about this driving over here. I thought, what if someone asked me when I make the comment about sometimes there are people who don't know what's actually happening on the ground. There is a disconnect there. We had some military leaders, and I'm talking about way up now, who didn't exactly know what was happening. Now, the battle itself was very confusing, especially initially. Nobody knew. Nobody back at brigade and nobody certainly back at division knew what was going on the ground because we walked into an ambush. It was a total surprise. We were totally surprised. The North Vietnamese had the advantage of surprise, firepower. They were concealed. We were in the open. So nobody knew what was going on for a long period of time. But Larry Gwynn, he mentioned Larry Gwynn's book, Baptism. I just was with Larry. A bunch of us young officer, lieutenant survivors were up in Cape Cod about a month ago. And if you haven't read Larry Gwynn's book, Baptism, Larry was the executive officer of A Company, the Point Company. I was executive officer of Delta Company. Don Cornett, my friend who was killed, was executive officer of Charlie Company. We were the 3 first lieutenant XOs in that battle. Now, Gwynn's company, A Company, George Dennis was the company commander. He was there with us at Cape Cod also. They formed basically the perimeter inside the copse of trees. In that perimeter, you had A Company, but 2 platoons, those initial shots I mentioned, that was because A Company had sent 2 platoons across the second clearing, and that's when contact was made with the ambush force. Those 2 platoons were wiped out. All wiped out. So A Company had 2 healthy platoons. My old recon platoon was part of the perimeter in the copse of trees, and then the command group with Colonel McDade, Frank Henry, and the company commanders who were all forward, who could not get back to their companies except George Forrest. George Forrest was in the last company, 5th Cavalry, A Company, 1st to the 5th. He sprinted about 400 yards through the entire ambush. Lost his RTO and someone else, but got back to his company, organized the perimeter at the tail of the column, and did a magnificent job. Yes?
Whose decision was it to leave LZ X-ray and go to where you were going,
Right.
as opposed to waiting there and being airlifted from LZ X-ray? Because they could have put the arc light in after.
Whose decision was it to leave X-ray and walk overland to LZ Albany rather than wait to be picked up? I've been asking that question for 50 years. Now, what we've been told, and to be honest about it, does the name Bruce Crandall mean anything to you? Bruce Crandall, he just received the Medal of Honor. He was one of the chopper pilots, Bruce Crandall and Ed Freeman, 2 tall Freeman. Ed just passed away. Both have been given the Medal of Honor, but they were chopper pilots in the 229th. Bruce Crandall told us that the reason we moved overland by because the Hueys were off on another mission. Keep in mind now, you can't get many people in the Huey, and you had a whole battalion sitting on the ground there on X-ray. So, and Bruce told us this. Bruce told us that we were not going back to be picked up and taken back to base camp like I was told, but again, keep in mind, I was just the 1st lieutenant. Bruce said that orders were coming down for brigade for us to organize and spend the night on Albany and then assault to the west towards the Cambodian border, which was only about 3 miles away, because intelligence had it that more bad guys were coming in. Well, what intelligence missed was they're already there. That was the 66th and the 33rd regiments that we ran into on the Adrang River.
Whose decision was it to move admin rather than tactical?
To do what now?
To move admin rather than
The
tactical.
question is, whose decision was it to move administratively? Everybody's, nobody's. We just did it. We were tired. Nobody corrected us. Now again, A Company and Recon Point were moving tactically, and the rest of us were just following them, and we didn't know any better. I was told we were going to be picked up and taken back to base camp. So in our minds, the battle was over. We didn't know those 3 regiments were sitting on the bank of that river. One thing I want to make sure y'all understand, we were very, very aware that we were the 7th Cavalry. We had a legacy. It was established in 1863 on the banks of a river called the Little Bighorn. We were ambushed on the banks of a river, the Ai Drang. Ai is the Vietnamese word for river. We almost repeated history. Yes, sir.
Citadel class of 60, sir.
Love it.
Okay. Your command group was on the ground.
Yes.
Eventually, that evolved, and every battalion commander thought he had the command from a helicopter. Did you see that evolution, that transition? I think it's awesome.
When I got back from the hospital, I knew that I was involved in the Bong San campaign. I was still weak and I didn't have any command at the time, but I was involved in getting mail out there and getting chai out there. And on the Bong San campaign in February and March of '66, I remember that the new battalion commander was doing a lot from a helicopter as opposed to being on the ground. I certainly understand how you would have a better picture of the battlefield, but I don't know how in the world you can command troops from up there. It's too fast, it's too fluid to have to send it by radio, and I don't know how you do that. I'm just not smart enough. Anything else?
I got a question. Right here.
Yes, sir.
Citadel 64, what company were you in at the Citadel, and were you close to Tom Metzger when he went down?
I am class of 63. I was in band company.
Okay.
And Tom Metzger was class of 61.
Correct.
Tom Metzger was with the command group of Hal Moore's in 1st Battalion, 7th Cavalry, and was actually was giving up. He was slightly wounded and was giving up his place on a Huey, a medevac Huey, to a soldier he felt was more severely wounded, when in fact, by giving up his spot, he was shot and killed in the battle. I did not, of course, in a military college, you don't hang around people in a higher class. There's not a fraternity there. So I avoided anybody who was outside the class of 63. They were ahead of me, and I was a plebe, and they were not. Yes, sir.
Jim, the previous battalion commander, John Delta White,
Yes.
I think he told you, rotate out or was he fired?
I didn't hear the second part.
Did John D. White rotate out of command?
Yeah, Colonel White was our battalion commander when we went over there on the ship and going in and helped train us. There was a big turnover, and you got to remember something too, guys. You got to remember how the 1st Cav Air Mobile was formed. We were a combination of the 11th Air Assault, the experimental air assault. Hal Moore and 1st of the 7th officers and enlisted men basically came out of the 11th Air Assault. They were air mobile trained. 2nd of the 7th was a converted infantry battalion from the 2nd Infantry Division, Fort Benning. The first patch I wore on my sleeve was the Indian Head patch. We were not air mobile trained. So, and then there was a big turnover, just a matter of weeks before the I-Drain. 1st of November, and the I-Drain was 17 November. Just a matter of weeks before John White rotates out, Bob McDade comes in, Skip Fessmeyer, new commander of Charlie Company, comes in. There was a lot of change there. And again, I was promoted and made executive officer of Delta Company, like my buddy Cornell was executive officer of Charlie Company. So the turnover was poorly timed once you consider we were committed to the I-Drain on the 14th to the 17th.
I was in Colonel White's battalion in the 2nd Infantry Division, and believe me, nobody should complain about Colonel McDade. I was on a landing zone in Vietnam in the I-Drain Valley.
You said that, I didn't. And I agree. I hear you. Yeah.
Please attribute that to my name.
I hear you.
I was on LZ in the I-Drain Valley in H-13. A line item 1 Alpha came in. Colonel McDade got out with a PRC-25 radio still in the box, and me and another doofus lieutenant had to show him how to put it together. But that's not necessarily derogatory about him.
Yeah, and again, I want to defend McDade because he did do his job in Korea. As I said, he got a Silver Star and I think a Purple Heart in Korea, so I can't say too much against it. Somebody else? Yes, sir.
General Jap, the overall North Vietnamese leader, recently died, and I just wonder whether you have any thoughts about the overall strategy from his point of view and the ability of the North Vietnamese soldiers you'd like to share.
Question is, General Giap recently died. He was commander of the North Vietnamese troops. In my opinion of them, the one thing I like that Joe and the Colonel did in this book, you really can't tell who the bad guys are. Joe and the general, and then in the movie, the North Vietnamese were treated like the opposition. It was us against them, but they weren't necessarily the bad guys, and we were the good guys. You know, part of me is bitter about the experience. If you've read McNamara's book In Retrospect, that book bothers me because there's one scene in that book where Lyndon Johnson and McNamara are sitting in the White House drinking coffee, and President Johnson turns to McNamara and says, "Why don't we send 10,000 more over there?" And it's kind of like, okay. By the way, who won the Yankees-Red Sox game? And it was too casual. It was too. I mean, we're talking about lives of young Americans here. So I had respect for the North Vietnamese. They were terrific fighters. I mean, they've come down the Ho Chi Minh Trail by foot, folks, carrying 30 and 50 and 70 and 80 pounds on their shoulders, maybe pushing a bicycle. And we, in their eyes, were the invaders. They fought the French in the 50s as the Viet Minh, and then here we come in, and we were the outsiders. So I had respect for them, and I understood. Now, yes, North Vietnamese was communist, and South Vietnamese was supposedly a democracy, but that's a joke. And that's what bothers me when you read The Outpost. When you read The Outpost, you'll find a very similar thing. We were defending a country in Vietnam that I'm not sure should have been defended. In that book, in Afghanistan, you've got these, same thing, you've got these village chieftains who are taking our money and taking our projects, bringing them water, and their sons are Taliban attacking us at night. And that isn't the way to fight a war. That's not the way to fight a war. You don't fight a war unless you've got an objective. You got a mountain to take or a field to take, and then you possess it and you hold it. And you know, that's the way the gentlemen from World War II, that's how they fought. That was a different war. That was the Great War. And I understood that war as well. But this war and the war now in Afghanistan, to me, I'll tell you, this is just not me speaking. General Moore was the Alabama Veteran of the Year in 2007, and I was his aide for 3 days. He was at the Lt.Ret Hotel, and I would go to his room, get him dressed, get him to whatever appointment he had or whatever speech he was making. Well, I've got a friend named Mike Royer who's a TV announcer with Channel 13 NBC in Birmingham, and Mike asked me could I arrange an interview with General Moore, and I did that. So General Moore is in a conference room at the Lt.Ret Hotel, and Mike, the NBC announcer, is there, and the camera's there, and I'm sitting behind the camera watching it. And Mike did a great job. He did a great interview. So when the interview was over, General comes to me and says, "All right, Lieutenant," he says, "where's the bar?" And I said, "Well, sir, it's right across the lobby." He said, "Come on, I'll buy you a drink." So we go in there, and you know, when you're a lieutenant and you're with a general, you kiss up. So I said, "Well," I said, "General, that was the interview, and I'm not going to quote it exactly because this is being recorded." He said, "Hell, Lieutenant, he didn't ask me the tough question." And I said, "Well, sir, what was that?" And this was Iraq, not Afghanistan. He said, "He didn't ask me what we ought to do in Iraq." I said, "Well, sir, what would you have said?" Now, I've got to edit this part. I wish I didn't. He said, "Well, I would say fly a bunch of airplanes in there, load them up, and get the hell out of that place." I think that's what we ought to do in Afghanistan. We maybe should have done that in Vietnam. It wouldn't be 58,000 names on a wall in Washington had we done that in Vietnam. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
I'm a Marine, so we look at things a little different than you fellows do. I have 3 things I'd like to mention. First, I'd like to ask you a question. When you were talking about the Green Wall, were you moving parallel to the wall or toward the wall?
I'm sorry, I was trying to catch that stand before it fell. Say it again.
When you talked about the Green Wall, were you moving parallel to the wall?
Yes. We paralleled it for about, I'm going to guess, a couple of 100 yards.
Well, in the Marine Corps, we have a battle tactic that I'm sure has to be in the Army too. I'm sure you're familiar with the term reconnaissance by fire. Why did you open up on that green wall before you got to it?
Because we were supposedly moving quietly to not, if there had been any other bad guys in the area, they wouldn't know where we were. Forget the fact we just torched the hooch down the road. But
I guarantee you at Idrang, they knew you were there.
That's right. And we did not recon by fire. We practiced the Mad Minute. You know what the Mad Minute was? We did that over on X-ray, and we wound up doing it later at dusk on Albany. But had we recon by fire, that might have been effective. But again, we were supposedly moving for pickup, and in our minds, the battle was over. And I told you, we screwed up. I'm glad to know the Marines never did.
Now I've got a point that's probably more important. I'm going to ask this to the whole room. How many of you have read General Geop's book?
I read excerpts of it online.
If you haven't read it, read it. Geop, and to me, and I talked to him about this at one point, and I asked him if this point was really true, and he said yes. Just before we pulled out of Saigon, Geop had pulled all of his troops as far north as he could take them. They were all the way up on the border. He had about 10,000 men left total in the whole North Vietnamese army. He couldn't feed them, didn't have enough ammunition. But he told me, he said, Major Talley, I read your newspapers every day, faithfully. He got all of our major newspapers every morning, and he read them. He was sitting up there waiting for us to give up and go home. When we pulled out of Saigon, he had made the decision that he was going to hold out for 2 more weeks. And at that point, if we were still in country, he was going to surrender. We came that close to winning that war. We can't do that in the Middle East.
No.
It's impossible. As far as the Muslims are concerned, this war's been going on for 900 years. And they don't care if it takes another 900 years. They're willing to sacrifice 100% of every man, woman, and child in the Middle East to kill Americans.
Well, let me say this to those of you who are remaining here, and I wish I'd said it when the whole group was here. In one of my pieces, I wrote this, and this is very important for you to hear. And I truly believe this. I know historically the Vietnam War is treated as a loss. Let me say something to you. We did not lose, we left. The politicians lost. Now you understand that. I want you to understand that. We did not lose, we left. Politicians lost, if in fact it was a loss. I want to make sure you understand that. Beg pardon?
The whole time we were there, we never lost the battle.
Well, if you judge that by body count, that's probably correct, but trust me, I don't feel like I was in a battle that we won. It hurts too much.
I was in one where I was the only survivor.
Only survivor? I understand. Thank you for your time. Thank you very much for your time. Good group.